Hey guys, tonight we drift sideways through the silk curtains of Olympus past the lyres and lounging lions, past fountains that pour not water but liquid rose petals, and find you lying beside a goddess whose beauty is so aggressive it feels like it's staring through you. Her name is Aphrodite, and she's bored out of her immortal skull. You're on a chaise that probably cost the GDP of an ancient kingdom. The marble floor is warm under your feet, and the air smells like cinnamon, sweat, and thunderclouds. Aphrodite stretches languidly, her golden hair pooling like sunlight over your shoulder, and sighs a sigh that carries the weight of 3,000 years of flattery. Ares is late. Again. You turn your head, trying not to be obvious about the fact that you're lying next to the universal concept of lust in human form. But she doesn't care. She's not looking at you. She's watching the doorway like a cat watches a laser pointer, impatient and already plotting murder. Outside, a war god is running late for a booty call. Now, let's be clear. You are not the hero of this story. You're barely even the intern. But tonight, you're our eyes, and right now, your job is to witness what happens when the goddess of love realizes she's stuck in a cosmic situationship with a man who thinks foreplay is sharpening his spear. In the bedroom, literally, there's a spear. It glows. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I want to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your city and local time in the comments so we can see just how far this sleepless little history rabbit hole goes. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together, because it all starts with one divine yawn. Aphrodite's lips part softly, lazily, and the sound she lets out is an annoyance. It's apathy. The kind of apathy that makes you wonder if Olympus can get termites from neglect. You're watching the woman who sparked wars with a wink, who made kings drop empires to write poetry, and she looks like she's been ghosted by a Tinder date. To your left, a servant spills nectar on their toga from sheer proximity to her mood. It's not anger. Anger would be fun. This is something worse. The truth is, Ares used to be exciting. Back in the day, you couldn't peel them off each other. Every battlefield was foreplay. Every blood-soaked tunic was a love letter. When Ares showed up to Olympus with a cracked helmet and a lip bite, Aphrodite would purr like a sun-drunk tiger. But something's changed. Or maybe too much hasn't. She swings her legs off the chaise and paces across the mosaic floor, her heels clicking like Judgment Day. And that's when you realize something no one on Olympus dares to say out loud. Aphrodite, the goddess of sex, seduction, and perfectly timed hair flips, is experiencing something terrifyingly mortal. She's getting bored, not the cute kind of boredom where you reorganize your ambrosia cabinet or seduce a minor river god just to pass the time. No, this is the kind of existential boredom where you start wondering whether being adored by every sentient creature in existence is actually a meaningful career choice. She's staring at a bust of herself carved into coral and mutters, "Why do they always get my nose wrong?" You don't answer. You can't. You're not even sure you exist in this moment. But she's not really talking to you. She's talking to the silence, to the void left by Ares' absence, and maybe by something deeper. Because here's the thing. The marble statues won't tell you desire gets tired. Even gods with perfect abs and poetic jawlines become routines. Even passion becomes performance. And she's tired of performing. Just then, the door creaks slow, hesitant, too quiet for someone like Ares. It opens to reveal not war incarnate, but a messenger boy, shaking like a leaf, holding a scroll as if it might explode. Aphrodite doesn't turn. She just says, "He's canceled again, hasn't he?" The boy nods. "Siege of Mytilene," he stammers. Apparently very urgent. He sends his, affection. She takes the scroll, reads it silently, then throws it into a brazier where it burns in silence. For a moment, All you hear is the crackle of fire and the whisper of harp strings from somewhere down the hall. Then she looks over her shoulder, eyes dark and gleaming like wet obsidian. "Would you like to see what real intimacy looks like?" she asks. You try not to choke on your own tongue. And this is how you end up in Hephaestus's workshop 3 days later, standing between anvils and half-finished automatons, while the god of fire and forge examines you with quiet, mechanical interest. Aphrodite leans into his ear and whispers something you don't catch, but it makes him blush under the soot. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, you're still in that moment, in that room, where the most beautiful being ever imagined has realized that her lover, her war god, her battlefield boy toy, is emotionally unavailable and worse, predictable. She used to love the adrenaline, the bruises shaped like poetry. But now he forgets anniversaries and regifts her spears. Some historians still argue whether the myth of Aphrodite and Ares was meant to represent the harmony of love and war, or to serve as a cautionary tale about hot people with no follow-through. The myths don't always agree, but the scrolls whisper what paintings can't say out loud, that she loved him once. Maybe still does, but she's not waiting anymore. There's a crack in the ceiling, probably just symbolic, but it lets in a shaft of late afternoon light, slicing across her like a cinematic moment no one else is awake to witness. You watch as she walks to the window, her dress dragging behind like the tail of a comet, and stares down at the mortal world below. Tiny cities, tiny hearts, mortal problems, but at least they feel them. She touches the glass, thoughtful. "Maybe I'll visit them," she says. "They remember how to want things." You think about saying something clever, something comforting, but you're immortal, or something like it. You don't speak goddess. Instead, you stand there, hoping she doesn't notice how loud your heart is beating. She smiles faintly, the kind of smile that could vaporize a medium-sized empire. "You're useful," she says. "Maybe I'll keep you around." And with that, you are officially in over your head. Welcome to Aphrodite's quarter-life crisis. It comes with harp music, passive-aggressive nudity, and the kind of emotional whiplash that makes therapists retire early. You don't sleep that night. Not because you're afraid, though fear would be rational, considering you're now personal emotional support mortal to a goddess, but because your mind can't stop replaying the way she said it. "Maybe I'll keep you around," like you're a stray she's too bored to abandon. Like she might forget you exist if something shinier walks past. You lie there on the edge of her fainting couch while she braids starlight into her hair, humming a lullaby from a language extinct for 10,000 years. Ares doesn't show. Again, the embers of the brazier pop in slow motion, one by one, like a countdown no one can hear but you. And still, Aphrodite doesn't sleep. She's too divine to need it, and too irritated to fake it. Around dawn, she announces that she's going for a walk. Her voice is sugar on glass. You don't dare ask where. You just follow. Past Dionysus's vine-strangled veranda, past Artemis's cold, dark hunting lodge empty, as usual, and down the stairs that mortals aren't supposed to see. You end up at a chariot stable, but not the flashy kind with flaming wheels. These are more practical, subtle, the kind that blend into clouds. And waiting beside one of them, arms crossed and looking like a gladiator who's lost his last coin at a tavern, is Ares. He's shirtless. Of course he's shirtless. And his skin is smeared with something that might be blood, or might just be aesthetic. His chest gleams with a sheen of war sweat and regret. Aphrodite doesn't stop walking, doesn't even glance at him. She just says, "You're late." He shrugs in that special way emotionally unavailable people, perfect by the 3rd century, of rejection. "Siege ran long," he mutters, and it's so hilariously cliché you almost laugh. But Aphrodite doesn't. She just lifts one eyebrow like she's preparing to smite someone with sarcasm. Ares tries again. "You look good." A beat. Rage suits you. She cocks her head, mildly impressed that he at least noticed. But it's too late. You can feel it. There's a chill under the sunrise, a stillness in her spine. The kind of goddess stillness that means the decision's already been made. She gets into the chariot, motions for you to follow. You do, because if you stay, you'll be collateral. Damage in a conversation that's about to escalate into something that poets would romanticize and therapists would flag as deeply toxic. The chariot lifts. Wind wraps around your ankles like whispers. Clouds part. Olympus shrinks behind you. Aphrodite says nothing for a long while. Then, just when you think the silence might become permanent, she says, "He used to be interesting. He used to sweat like it meant something." You don't know what to say to that. So she keeps talking. The first time we kissed, it was on a battlefield. I had just convinced two opposing armies to throw down their swords and compose love sonnets. He was furious, I was radiant, we met in the chaos. She pauses, eyes far away. He said my name like it was the start of a war. And now, she trails off. Then, now he just texts, you blink. He texts, she grins. Not in words, in sacrifices. Dead goats and bronze armor and perfume made from crushed lily. But the meaning's the same. He sends tokens instead of time. Passion by proxy. I should have seen it coming. The chariot dips. Below, you see the Aegean Sea glittering like spilled diamonds. Islands float like crumbs on satin. She's steering toward one of the quieter ones. No temples, no cults. Just cliffs and wind and the ruins of something old and unlabeled. The moment. You land, she kicks off her sandals and steps barefoot onto the stone. Her feet don't bleed. Of course they don't. This is where they built my first altar, she says, before I even had a name. Before they knew whether I was a dream or a hallucination. They carved their prayers into bone. They offered Emmy wine and poems in their own blood. She turns slowly. Now it's all Instagram filters and Pinterest boards. They light candles but forget why. They worship my image but ignore the ache behind it. She picks up a broken statue head, cradles it like a child. Even Ares, he loved the idea of me more than the reality. He wanted the climax, not the quiet, the thrill, not the tending. She laughs, bitter and soft. He makes love like he's storming a city. No wonder I started sneaking off. And just like that, you're into the first real secret of the night. She tells you about Hephaestus. Now, you know the public version. The affair with the god of forge, the net trap, the shame parade. But what no scroll captured was the beginning. Before the trap, before the rage, before the shame. Hephaestus, she says, sitting down against a vine-wrapped column, never asked to touch me. He just offered to build me a place to breathe. You see it in her face now, that soft crack in her goddess armor. The memory of gentleness, of being held like art, not possession. He didn't compliment my beauty. He complimented my choices. He watched me choose who I wanted to be, and he built a throne for her. She smiles to herself. He kissed my palms before my lips. You glance away. Not because you're embarrassed, but because it feels holy, hearing her speak like this. A confession wrapped in nostalgia. A goddess remembering what it felt like to be seen. But even that didn't last, because Hephaestus wanted permanence. And she, being Aphrodite, thrives in the fleeting. In the chase, the change, the never quite catching. They were doomed by design, and Ares, he was never the plan. He was the storm she ran into just to feel wind again. You ask her if she ever loved him. She looks up, eyes blazing with something halfway between fury and fondness. Of course I did. Love isn't about worthiness, it's about gravity. He pulled me in, but I've been floating for centuries, and now, I think I want to land. She stands, wipes the dust off her dress. Come, we've got things to steal. Wait, what? But, she's already walking, humming again, and this time the tune has teeth. You follow because of course you do. You're past the point of questioning anything. She leads you into a cavern behind the cliffs, where light filters through cracks like veins. Inside, relics, forgotten offerings, altars overtaken by moss. And silence. She picks up a necklace made of bone and gold, holds it to her throat. They used to give me tokens of devotion, she says. Now they give me lip filler and dating app bios. She pockets the necklace. I miss when love was dangerous. You point out that love is still dangerous. That mortals still bleed. For it, that someone wrote a whole sonnet cycle about getting ghosted last week. She considers this. Perhaps. But I don't want just worship. I want risk. She walks deeper into the cave. Which means it's time I reminded Olympus what love really is. And just like that, her boredom vanishes, replaced by something far more terrifying. Purpose. You realize now, Aphrodite isn't just tired of Ares. She's tired of being reduced to a smile. A symbol. A statue in a museum where people take selfies, but never feel what she represents. She's ready to make love dangerous again, and that should worry everyone. But it doesn't yet. Because no one sees her coming. Not even Ares polishing. His armor and thinking is sword-shaped. Apology will do the trick. You're alone with a goddess and her mid-eternity rebrand. And she's not just bored anymore. She's planning. The plan starts the next morning, which is technically still the same eternal sunrise if you're on Olympus time. But on the mortal clock it's early fog hanging, rooster stretching, bread baking early. Aphrodite doesn't sleep, so you don't either. Instead, you watch her sketch symbols into the sand with a pearl hairpin that doubles as a lockpick. Every god has a domain, she mutters, but most of them cling to it like it's a leash. She's not drawing a map. She's drawing a list. Names, lovers, enemies, rivals. Ares is there. Naturally, but so is Hera, because even passive aggression leaves bruises. So is Apollo. He once tried to seduce me using a haiku about sunstroke. And at the bottom of the list, circled in gold dust, is mortals. Not a name, a category, a reminder. They remember what we forget, she says, not looking at you but through you. That desire isn't a game, it's a gamble. You try to sound insightful. You say, so what's the goal? Revenge? She smirks. No, restoration. She stands up and wipes the sand clean with a single sweep of her foot. Love needs to feel like a risk again, even for us. Which sounds noble until she pulls a dagger from thin air and says, and also, someone needs to be mildly terrified. The first stop is Eros. He's lounging in a pool made of liquid moonlight, tossing grapes into the air and letting nymphs compete to catch them in their mouths. You expect tension. This is her son, after all, but they hug like old co-conspirators. Mother, he purrs, back from your goddess sabbatical? She ignores the jab and sits beside him, letting her toes dangle into the pool. I need your help, something messy, something poetic. Eros's eyes light up like mischief incarnate. Do I get to aim blindfolded again? She nods. But this time, aim for the gods. He laughs so hard a nearby nymph slips and falls in. Finally, Olympus has gone soft. Last week, Hermes cried during a breakup and asked me to send his ex a playlist. She leans in. I want chaos, Eros. Old school chaos. The kind with sonnets. And shattered furniture. He agrees instantly, because let's be honest, this is what he was built for. You watch, stunned, as Aphrodite and her chaos cupid son draft a love sabotage strategy with the precision of military generals. They're choosing targets. Dionysus and Athena opposites who need a push. Artemis and a mortal poet with tragic cheekbones. Even Hades and Persephone get a spicy subplot just for fun. Love bombs, Aphrodite calls them. Each one designed to remind them what it feels like. You ask the obvious. What about Ares? She pauses. He doesn't get a warning. He gets a mirror. That afternoon, you find yourself back in her private chambers, where the air smells like something ancient and intoxicating. The room is filled with mirrors, but not the kind that show your reflection. These mirrors show your desires. You look into one, and for a flicker, you see someone touching your face like a secret. You step back quickly. "Don't stare too long," she says. "They remember." She picks up one and traces a finger over its edge. "This one will go to Aries. He'll see every version of me that doesn't need him." You blink. "That sounds cruel." She tilts her head. Cruel is giving someone a taste of intimacy, then replacing it with indifference. This is honesty. She wraps the mirror in silk and seals it with a kiss so powerful the room trembles. Somewhere in the distance, a storm cloud shifts. That night, a messenger delivers the mirror to Ares' forge. He doesn't understand it at first. He thinks it's a trap, a magical artifact, maybe a prank. He glares into it expecting betrayal, and instead sees Aphrodite laughing in someone else's arms. He sees her dancing barefoot in Lesbos. He sees her wrapped in silk in Hephaestus' lap. He sees her crowned in flowers, unbothered and radiant. He sees a version of her who has outgrown him. And for the first time in centuries, Ares feels something that isn't lust or fury. He feels irrelevant. And he hates it. Meanwhile, Olympus begins to shift. The love bombs land like divine grenades. Dionysus stumbles into Athena's library at midnight, drunk and rambling about logic being sexy. She rolls her eyes, then kisses him just to prove a point. Artemis spends 3 sleepless nights listening to bad poetry, and then invites the poet hunting. Just a platonic ambush, she claims. Eros floats above it all, sipping wine and giggling. They forgot how to ache, he says. Now they remember. And Aphrodite? She's watching from the sidelines, eyes glowing like storm lanterns. Desire, she whispers, is the only thing that makes immortality bearable. But it's not all sparks and romance. Some of the gods don't take it well. Hera demands an emergency meeting of the Pantheon. Apollo composes a 47-verse poem, titled "This is Emotional Abuse." Even Zeus gets involved, mostly because someone curses his new mortal mistress with chronic indifference. "Fix this," he growls. Aphrodite smiles sweetly. "Oh, darling, I'm not breaking anything. I'm just reminding." You ask if she's worried. She shakes her head. They'll rage. They'll cry. But they'll feel. And that's more than they've done in centuries. You're not sure whether to be impressed or concerned. Then Ares shows up. No announcement. No trumpet. Just the smell of steel and thunder and hurt pride. He walks into Aphrodite's chambers like a soldier, returning from a war he didn't win. She's reclining on a couch, sipping something pink and dangerous. He doesn't say anything at first, just looks at her. Then, "Why him?" She raises an eyebrow. "Which him?" "You'll have to be more specific." He flinches. "Hephaestus. The poet, the girl in Lesbos, the mirror." She sets down her drink. "Because they made me feel something. Because they saw me. Because they didn't treat love like a battlefield." He steps closer. "And I did?" She stands, walks right up to him. "You made it a war, and I got tired of dying for it." There's silence. Then he says, "I still love you." She touches his cheek gently. That's not enough anymore. He leaves, not in rage, not in shame, but in something worse. Realization. Later, Aphrodite sits beside you and exhales slowly. "That hurt," she says. You ask, "Why do it?" She smiles faintly. "Because love isn't safe. It never was. But it should be true." And just like that, you realize she didn't just break hearts tonight. She broke patterns. By the time dawn blushes over Olympus again, the air smells different, like lilacs after lightning. You and Aphrodite are seated on a balcony carved from seashells and laziness, sipping a tea that tastes like secrets. She's not wearing war paint this morning. Just a robe, loose around the shoulders, skin kissed by candlelight. There's no armor, no game face. Just a woman who's burned down the house of routine and now sits amid its smoke with oddly calm eyes. I've been too easy to understand, she says softly. Not to you exactly, but to the air. Maybe the gods eavesdropping on the breeze. They made me the goddess of soft music and scented letters, but that was never the whole truth. You think about that as she lifts her teacup and stares into it like it holds omens. They forgot I was born from sea foam and the blood of the sky, she continues. I came from violence, not perfume. You wonder how many other gods have forgotten that origin story. How many centuries of poems have dulled the blade of who she used to be? You walked together later that day through one of her temples in Sparta. Because, yes, even the most war-hungry city had a soft spot for Aphrodite. The columns are cracked, and ivy has started reclaiming her altar, but the scent of old incense clings to the stone. A priestess sees her, doesn't recognize her, of course, because she's in mortal glamour, wearing sandals like a peasant and hair tied up like she's just another girl who hasn't slept. But there's a moment, a flicker, a deep curtsy, as if the body remembers even when the eyes don't. Aphrodite smiles gently and lights a candle anyway. They loved me differently here, she says. They thought I made their husbands better. Warriors, that if they touched my statue before battle, they'd fight with fire in their loins and tenderness in their hands. She chuckles, which is probably why so many Spartan boys died writing poems in their heads while stabbing people. As you walk past the temple's inner sanctum, she stops to examine a faded mural. It's her, painted naked but draped in shadows, surrounded by lovers whose faces have all peeled away with time. She touches the wall. You know what's funny? The mortals get it right more often than the gods do. They might distort me, filter me, turn me into love potions and valentines. Cards, but at least they feel something when they look at me. She turns to you, that faraway look sliding into something sharper. Ares looked at me like a possession. Hephaestus like a puzzle. The mortals look like they're afraid I might devour them. A beat, which, honestly, is closer to the truth. And this is when she tells you about the other lovers. The ones even the myths forgot. There was a prince in Phoenicia, with lips that trembled every time he read her poetry aloud. She met him in the courtyard of his father's palace, where he was trying to sketch birds, but ended up drawing her instead. They had one night, just one. He died in a shipwreck the next week. She still has the sketch. There was a priestess in Crete, bold and fierce, who made Aphrodite beg, yes, beg, to stay longer each night. She wasn't beautiful in the traditional sense, Aphrodite says, but her voice could hypnotize a mountain. They whispered to each other through incense smoke until the temple caught fire, and neither of them left. She burned to ash. Aphrodite still smells smoke in her dreams. There was even a Roman senator's daughter who carved Aphrodite's name into her thigh and never married, choosing instead to build a villa filled with flowers that only bloomed under moonlight. They called her mad, Aphrodite says, almost proudly. But she called it devotion. Historians still argue whether these lovers were real or allegory, passion or propaganda. But the way she tells it, eyes half closed, voice barely brushing, the wind, you start to believe every word. Because it's not just names she remembers. It's scents, breath, the shape of mouths in candlelight. She tells you all this like someone finally unpacking old boxes from a house she never wanted. To leave. Later, you wander with her through a Spartan market. No one knows who she is. To them, she's just another tall woman with too perfect posture and eyes that make them forget what they were selling. She buys a dagger, not a decorative one, but the kind meant to cut arteries. It's for rituals, she says. You're not sure if she's joking. Then she buys figs and feeds you one like you're a baby bird. It tastes like sunlight and faint panic. You watch her flirt with the baker's wife. Not cruelly, not seductively, but like she's giving the woman the chance to remember what it feels like to be seen. The woman blushes so hard she nearly drops a tray of honey cakes. Aphrodite hums as you leave. "I'm not always looking to seduce," she says. "Sometimes I just remind people they're still alive." That night, she pulls out a book. Not a divine tome, a mortal one. "Sex with Kings," the spine reads. She flips through it like it's a yearbook. Ah, Christina of Sweden. She wrote love letters that could boil wine. She keeps reading, smiling. Catherine the Great? Underrated. Everyone jokes about horses but ignore her erotic novels. She knew power and pleasure were at opposites, they were twins. She tosses the book to you. Foucault was right, you know. Desire isn't just about pleasure. It's about structure, control, how we negotiate bodies and permission. You nod like you understood that. You didn't, but it sounds hot and vaguely threatening. She curls up beside a brazier, watching the flames curl like lovers in a tangle. Ares wanted to dominate me. Hephaestus wanted to fix me. Most mortals just want to have me. But only a few ever wanted to understand me. She looks at you then, and suddenly you're sweating. And you? She asks, "What do you want?" You fumble. Honesty seems safer than performance. To witness, to understand. To be near it without stealing it. She smiles slowly. "Good answer." Then softer. "Careful. That's how I start to like someone." The moon is high by now, and the temple is quiet. Even Eros has gone quiet, probably off causing a minor diplomatic crisis by making Poseidon fall in love with a seagull again. You and Aphrodite sit in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled, the kind that tastes like the edge of a cliff. "Tomorrow," she says, "we visit Lesbos." You don't ask why. You already know that the road to Delphi hums beneath the chariot wheels like a heartbeat pressed into stone. You sit beside Aphrodite as the horses' dappled white things with manes like comet trails carry you through winding mountain passes, their hooves leaving behind small sparks that vanish before they hit the ground. She's quiet today, not the brooding, smoldering kind of quiet. This is the rare silence of a goddess who's decided to listen. The wind combs through her hair, the smell of crushed pine and damp moss rising from the cliffs below. Somewhere, off in the distance, you hear a flute. Or maybe it's just the sound of tension slowly unraveling. Delphi looms ahead, not as grand as Olympus, not as bright, but heavier. Sacred in a different register. A place that doesn't demand your worship, it makes you ask for it. Aphrodite doesn't flinch as the temple of Apollo comes into view, its columns pale as bone and twice as ancient. You expect the priests to bow, to panic, to throw laurel wreaths and incense at her feet. They don't, because she's not Aphrodite today, not officially. Just a traveler with sun-warmed skin and eyes too full of history. She walks among them. Like fog, not a threat, but an inevitability. And when she steps into the sanctuary, even the Pythia, the high priestess of prophecy, eyes white with vision, goes still. Aphrodite nods. The Pythia nods back. You're not sure what just passed between them, but it was older than language. You don't follow her inside right away. You stay by the threshold, where the scent of burned laurel hangs thick and holy. A priest offers you a sip of something, wine or poison, maybe both, and you take it. It tastes like copper and violets. When you do finally step in, Aphrodite is seated beside the tripod, cross-legged on the marble floor, talking softly. Not commanding, not seducing, just talking. "I didn't come for answers," she says, without turning around. "I came to return something." She pulls from her tunic a small smooth stone, pink and worn like a worry token. "She gave me this once, said it would help me speak without fear." You don't ask who she is, you already know. The Pythia takes the stone without a word, presses it to her lips, closes her eyes, then the air changes. The whole chamber seems to inhale. flames flicker sideways. The shadows lean in, greedy for gossip. And the Pythia speaks, not in riddles this time, not in the veiled metaphors the oracles are famous for, but in a voice layered with too many echoes. You were never just a goddess of beauty, she says. You were the revolution in skin, the insurgency of tenderness, the weapon dressed as invitation. Aphrodite doesn't blink. Then why did they strip me down to petals and perfume? The oracle's head tilts. Because power that smiles is more terrifying than power that roars. Because they could name you, but they couldn't claim you. So they minimized you. Aphrodite's hands clenched just slightly. Even Ares? Especially Ares, the oracle whispers. You watch this unfold, heart knocking against your ribs like a protest drum. There's no thunder, no divine declaration. Just the slow, aching unearthing of a truth that's been buried under centuries of marble statues and heart-shaped marketing. Aphrodite came here not to reclaim something, but to release it. To stop being everyone else's fantasy and start being her own reality again. And it's working. You can feel it. Even the air tastes different now, less like incense. More like ozone before a storm. Later, as the sun begins to lower itself toward the curve of the earth, you and Aphrodite sit on the temple steps. She's barefoot again, her legs stretched out, toes pointed at the horizon. They used to fear me, you know, she says, voice soft but sharp enough to cut glass. Not because I was cruel, but because I made them want. And wanting real wanting is uncontrollable. That scared them more than war. She tilts her head, watching the hawk spiral above the valley. Even now, they keep trying to make desire polite. Package it. Sell it, declaw it. She smiles, but it always escapes. Slips through the cracks, finds a way to pulse again. You. Hand her a fig from the temple orchard. She bites into it, juice running down her wrist, and laughs. There was a time I would have made this erotic, she says. Now, I just want to taste it. You think that's the most dangerous thing. She's said all day. That night, you stay in the guest quarters beneath the temple. The room is small, cool stone, a single candle. She doesn't sleep, of course. She paces. Not restless. Intentional. Like she's walking the edge of something important. You hear her whispering names. Not just lovers, cities, statues, versions of herself that were loved too quickly or too loudly. Then, out of nowhere, she says, "Do you know what makes a god tired?" You answer with a question, immortality. She shakes her head, being misunderstood for eternity. Then she crosses the room, sits beside you on the cot, and takes your hand. Not romantically, not divinely, just humanly. Tell me. Something, she says. Anything. A secret. A fear. A dream you had once and forgot until just now. You blink, stunned. Then you tell her. About the time you fell in love with someone who never saw you. About the letter you wrote, but never sent. About the way you sometimes feel like you're sleepwalking through your own memories. She listens, really listens. When you finish, she leans her head against your shoulder. Thank you, she says, for making me feel mortal again. Before dawn, she's already up, dressed in deep purple, eyes clear and terrifying. We leave at first light, she says. We have to stop by Corinth. There's a priest there who keeps sculpting me like I'm surprised to be naked. I intend to correct him. You smile. She doesn't. I'm serious, she says. It's not the nudity I mind. It's the expression. You board the chariot again, and as you rise into the sky, you look down at Delphi, the temple shrinking beneath clouds, the valley curling around it like a secret. You realize that Aphrodite didn't just return something there. She left something. Too, a version of herself she no longer needs, a softer ghost. A worshipped silhouette dot and what she's becoming now. It doesn't fit in temples. There's something almost comedic about arriving in Corinth as a storm cloud. Quite literally. The chariot cuts through a sky boiling with dramatic intent, thunder rumbling like a god with indigestion, lightning crackling just far enough away to be atmospheric. Aphrodite, naturally, is unbothered. She lounges back with her legs crossed, wind tossing her hair like a slow-motion shampoo commercial designed by a sadist. Corinth, she mutters, eyeing the city below, the only place where priests worship my backside more than my doctrine. You try to stifle a laugh, but she hears it and grins. They think they're subtle, chiseling dimples into marble. I swear, one even gave me ABs last year. Me, ABs. She shakes her head, as if I lift more than a glass of nectar or an eyebrow. You land in the courtyard of a grand temple Corinthian in every architectural sense. Gaudy, excessive, adorned. With gold so polished it reflects your flaws before your face. The high priest, who's clearly been waiting for her arrival with the kind of anxiety usually reserved for surprise audits, steps forward, robes flapping like they're trying to escape him. "Goddess," he says, dropping to his knees. "Your statue, your likeness, has drawn more worshippers than any temple in Greece. We've held daily festivals in your honor." "We..." "Relax," she interrupts, inspecting the column with mild disdain. "I'm not here for a Yelp review." He goes silent, trembling slightly, which is fair. Aphrodite, even when smiling, radiates the kind of tension that suggests she might turn your liver into a love charm if she's in a mood. She walks past him into the temple's inner sanctum, where her statue stands. It's enormous, gleaming, arms outstretched in a pose that's somewhere between welcome and arrest me. And she just stares at it for a long, painful moment. "Why," she finally says, "do I look like I've never seen a naked body before?" You squint. She's not wrong. The expression carved into the statue's face is a mix of surprise, innocence, and faint, digestive distress. "I look like someone's about to hand me a towel," she mutters. Then she points at the hips. "And those aren't my hips. Those are idealized. Those are hips that never birthed a myth or sat for 10 hours at a banquet, debating the ethics of ambrosia distribution." She turns to the priest. "Who sculpted this?" He gulps. "A local artisan. He said he had a vision." She snorts. "He had a kink." Without ceremony, she picks up a chisel from a nearby altar, because of course there's a ceremonial chisel, and begins correcting the statue herself. You can't believe what you're seeing. A literal goddess performing unsolicited statue surgery in front of a horrified clergy. She chips away at the expression first, softening the eyes, curling the lips into something knowing, a smirk that could either save or ruin you depending on your mood. Then she moves to the posture, subtly adjusting the shoulders to suggest confidence, not hesitation. Finally, she smooths the thighs. "There," she says, stepping back. "Now I look like I've done things. Dangerous things. Tender things. Things that don't belong in hymns but live in glances across crowded rooms." The priest stammers something about artistic interpretation, but she cuts him off with a look that could rupture economies. "Art is power," she says. "You don't get to erase my history just because it makes your altar boys blush." Then softer. "Desire isn't shameful, it's sacred. And if you're going to build temples in my name, at least make them honest." You leave the temple to the sound of frantic priests whispering to each other like scandalized doves. Aphrodite, unfazed, tosses the chisel into a fountain and walks barefoot through the marketplace. The city feels her presence instantly. Vendors stop shouting. Lovers squeeze hands tighter. A donkey brays in confused admiration. She buys a cluster of grapes from an old woman who doesn't recognize her, but calls her "my rose" anyway. "See?" Aphrodite says. She gets it. You nod, because you're starting to understand too. This trip isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation. Taking back the pieces of her that have been prettied into fiction, stripped of fire, and frozen in place by history's lazy brush. That night, you find yourselves in a bathhouse that smells like eucalyptus and ambition. The air is thick with steam and whispered rumors. A noble woman is sobbing into her wine over a marriage proposal she doesn't want, while a soldier tries to flirt with a philosopher by complimenting his sandal straps. Aphrodite watches it all with amused detachment. "Mortals," she says. "Tragic little stars. They burn so fast and then wonder why everything hurts." She sinks into the water, steam rising around her like a private storm. "But gods, we stagnate, we calcify, we forget how to ache." "That's worse." She tells you a story then, half submerged in the pool, voice floating between droplets. It's about a nobleman from Carthage, centuries ago, who built an entire shrine to her using only stolen kisses. Every lover he had, he convinced to donate a symbol, a lock of hair, a ribbon, a tear caught in glass, and he placed them all in her honor. "He said I taught him how to love ethically," she recalls. Which, frankly, I think he misunderstood. You ask what happened to him. "He died in bed," she says. "Not of age or illness. Of heartbreak. Actual, literal heartbreak. The physician said his heart swelled and burst, like a plum." She shrugs. Poetic, messy, perfect. Later, she reads aloud from a scroll she borrowed or maybe stole from the temple library. It's an erotic hymn written by a cult that worshipped her feet. Yes, specifically her feet. The erotic spirit through history barely scratched. "The surface," she mutters, halfway through a verse involving honey and sandal straps. Desire isn't always about climax. Sometimes it's about absurdity. You ask if it bothers her, being fetishized in so many odd, obsessive ways. She thinks for a moment. "Not if it's honest. I'd rather be worshipped weirdly than adored falsely." You fall asleep that night to the sound of distant lyres and closer laughter. Aphrodite is still awake, sitting by the window, sketching something with charcoal on the wall. You can't see what. Maybe it's a map, maybe a face, maybe a memory. But whatever it is, she's drawing it slowly, reverently, as if it might disappear if she rushes. You drift off wondering if she dreams, if gods dream, if she ever dreams of being unknown again, free, mortal. In the morning, she wakes you with a whisper. "We're going to the island next," she says. "The one with the temple ruins and the legend about the woman who married a ghost." You nod, too groggy to ask questions. But she adds, as you're boarding the chariot, "Sometimes ghosts are better lovers. At least they don't interrupt." And with that, you're off again into more mist, more myth, more memory. You don't know the name of the island. Maybe it never had one. Maybe it got erased from the maps for being too embarrassing, too intimate, too full of stories that couldn't be carved onto heroic reliefs. What you do know is that it appears suddenly out of the fog like a memory you didn't ask for, but recognize instantly: low hills, overgrown ruins, the ghost of a temple leaning against the sky like it's too tired to stand proud anymore. Aphrodite doesn't say a word as the chariot descends. She's dressed in white today, but not the ceremonial kind. It's linen, soft, nearly translucent, like she's decided to wear vulnerability as armor. And when her feet touch the earth, you feel the entire island flinch, like it remembers her scent. You follow, of course, though everything in your spine suggests you should tread carefully here. The wind is too quiet. The trees too still. Even the birds seem to be holding their breath. She walks without hesitation through a grove of olive trees and wild myrtle, past stone columns split by time and lightning. Then she stops in front of what used to be a shrine. It's nothing more than rubble now, but there's a faint scent of rose oil in the air, like someone lit a prayer here. Yesterday. This, she says, voice low and oddly affectionate, is where they whispered about the woman who married a ghost. Not a metaphor, a literal ghost. He showed up in her bed one night, said he was sent by me. You blink. Did you send him? She tilts her head. Not directly. But sometimes love needs loopholes. She steps over a fallen beam and runs, her fingers along a half-buried altar stone. She was a widow, young, lonelier than she admitted. And one night he appeared, said he'd died at sea, that the gods had given him one night to say goodbye. But he kept coming back, every night, and she let him. Not because she was desperate, but because he listened. You sit on a rock nearby, trying not to interrupt the quiet. What happened to her? You ask. Aphrodite smiles sadly. One morning she walked into the village and said she was pregnant. Said the ghost was the father. They laughed, of course, mocked her, shunned her, but she never wavered. She pauses, staring into the trees like she might see her through the branches. When the child was born, he had no shadow. A shiver slides down your spine. They burned the house down, called it witchcraft, said she'd laid with demons. But she never cried, just held her child and said, "Love doesn't need a body, just presence." Aphrodite brushes something from her cheek that might be a tear or just dust. They never built her a monument, but I remember. The wind shifts, and with it comes the sound of laughter, not joyous, but bitter. Two women stand at the edge of the grove, spectral, translucent, dressed in layers of time. One holds a comb, the other a torch. "Ignore them," Aphrodite murmurs. Temple gossips. They've been dead for centuries but never stopped whispering. One of the ghosts sneers. "Back to rewrite your myth again, goddess." Aphrodite doesn't flinch. "No," she replies. "Just here to remember what the myths forgot." The ghost with the comb laughs. "You were always good at spinning your own endings." Aphrodite steps forward. "And you were always jealous they weren't about you." With that, the ghosts vanish, like breath on a mirror. You walk with her toward the sea, where the temples' foundation meets the cliff's edge. She kneels and places something on the ground, a ring, simple, gold, worn. "It was hers," she says. "The ghost bride. She left it here when she died. Said I should keep it until the world stopped punishing women for loving strangely." You look around. No one's watching. No priests, no altars. Just you, a goddess, and the bones of a forgotten story. "You know," she says after a while, "that's the real scandal of me. Not the affairs, not the nudity, but that I validated the strange loves. The inconvenient ones. The ones that don't make sense on scrolls." She rises. "I made people believe their yearning was sacred. And the other gods hated that." You ask if she ever fell for a mortal the way the ghost bride did. She smiles, not at you but somewhere. To your left, like the past just whispered something rude in her ear. "Once," she says, "he was a scholar. Wrote plays about love that no one understood. But I adored his handwriting. He'd fall asleep quoting tragedies and wake up quoting me." She chuckles. "He died choking on a grape at a banquet. I cried for a week and then made sure every love scene in his surviving plays made people weep." She sits beside you on the cliff, legs dangling over the edge. "Mortal love burns fast, but oh, how it burns." That night, the two of you camp beneath the stars. There are no beds, no silk pillows, just a fire, some stolen wine, and a blanket that smells like pomegranate and dust. Aphrodite tells stories between sip-short ones, long ones, scandalous ones. One about a queen who ruled an empire by sleeping with her enemies until they changed their minds. Another about a monk who carved her name into every candle he lit, swearing she appeared to him in the flame. "He never touched another person," she says. "But he loved me completely. It still counts." Then she opens a scroll. "Kama Sutra," she says, smirking. The original version, not the sanitized tourist bait. She reads aloud a passage. "That doesn't describe acts so much as emotions. The way a lover's breath should match yours. The way fingers should pause, not pounce. People think it's a sex manual," she says. "But it's really about timing, about presence, about rhythm." Even in touch there is philosophy. She rolls the scroll back up and tosses it into her satchel like a used napkin. Gods lose that. We go through the motions, forget the heartbeat. We seduce like it's performance art. Mortals seduce like they might die in the middle of it. Before sleep, she places the ghost bride's ring on a stone, kisses it once, and whispers something in a language older than grief. The wind carries it away, maybe to the underworld, maybe to no one at all. You lie there beside her, the fire low, her breath steady. You're not afraid of ghosts, you say. She hums, I am one. And somewhere across time, across myth, the ghost bride smiles. By the time you reach the mainland again, you're starting to realize something unsettling. Aphrodite is changing. Not visibly. Her cheekbones still look like they were carved by divine committee. Her voice still curls through the air like silk dipped in sign. But there's a weight in the way she moves now. A slow-burning gravity that wasn't there before. You used to see her as the goddess of effortless desire, of spontaneous combustion in a glance, of lust that needed no reason. But now you're watching her shift into something more dangerous, more intentional, like desire reloaded with purpose. And you know this change isn't accidental. It's a reclamation. You arrive in Athens at dusk, just as the city begins to glow gold and deceptive. From a distance, it looks like a library dressed for a wedding, white marble kissed by twilight, towers reaching for answers. But up close, it's all noise and contradiction. Philosophers arguing with fishmongers, poets reciting dirges in taverns, young men in robes too short for their confidence. Aphrodite dismounts the chariot with her usual effortless elegance. But you notice her eyes scanning the skyline with something like suspicion. They love ideas here, she mutters. More than people. You don't have to ask what that means. She's not wrong. Athens worships the intellect like a jealous lover burns offerings at the altar of logic, but forgets to write thank you notes to feeling. She steps through the agora like a myth come to collect, and heads directly for the Stoa, where the philosophers gather to debate the meaning of everything except the things that make their hearts stutter. There's a man standing at the center of a circle, mid-monologue. His robes are clean, his beard oiled, his hands flailing like they're trying to swat away emotional nuance. Desire is an illusion, he proclaims, a disruption of virtue. Love is a distraction from wisdom. Lust is the enemy of truth. And that's when Aphrodite coughs. Just once. Soft, surgical. Every head turns. The philosopher falters. He sees her. Really sees her. And you watch a man who has probably never questioned the structure of his own soul suddenly remember the feel of his mother's embrace, the ache of his first heartbreak, the way his hands trembled the first time he touched someone in the dark. He forgets his sentence. She smiles. Tell me, she says, walking toward him with the patience of a slow-building storm. How do you define truth without acknowledging the body? He opens his mouth, closes it, opens it again. Because if you ignore the pulse, she continues, you're not chasing truth. You're avoiding it. She's close now. Not threatening, not seductive, just present. Desire, she says, is how the soul practices being honest. The circle is silent. A younger student nearby drops his scroll. The clatter echoes like thunder. She turns to the crowd. Philosophy has its place, she says. But don't mistake it for immunity. Even Plato cried when his lover left. She walks away before anyone can respond, the way only someone who doesn't need applause ever truly can. You follow, heart pounding. You've done that before, you say. She shrugs. Many times. But they always think they're the first to feel exposed. She leads you through the winding alleys of Athens, down toward the lower districts where the intellectuals rarely wander. The streets smell like spiced meat and ambition. Here, the city breathes differently, realer, thicker. End up at a small shrine tucked behind a wine shop. It's unmarked, no priests, No offerings. Just a stone ledge and a few wilted flowers. Aphrodite kneels, lights a single candle. This, she says, is where the courtesans used to pray. Before they entertained, before they bled, before they learned to fake pleasure for coins. You kneel beside her. You knew them? She nods. Every single one. They called me mother, not because I made them, but because I saw them. Because I never asked them to apologize for wanting. She reaches into her satchel and pulls out a small pouch. Inside, an old brooch, broken, bent. She gave me this, she says. Ties of Alexandria. She said it reminded her of herself. Beautiful once, useful once, then tossed aside. You want to say something comforting, but words feel small here. She places the brooch on the altar. Desire isn't just longing, she says. It's defiance. It's choosing to feel in a world that keeps numbing you. A pause. That's why I never fit neatly into Olympus. They wanted me beautiful, not loud. She stands. The candle flickers. Somewhere someone begins to sing, not a hymn. Love song, cracked and off-key, drifting from an open window. Aphrodite smiles. That's the kind of worship I like best. Unpolished, off-rhythm, honest. As you walk back through the city, she points out little things. A couple arguing. In the street, still holding hands. A girl feeding a stray dog the last of her bread. A young man writing a letter he'll never send. They don't know it, she says, but that's all me. Every small, dumb act of aching. You spend the night in a modest home above the wine shop. The room smells like crushed berries and thyme. Aphrodite lies back on the floor, arms splayed out like a fallen constellation. I've been thinking, she says. Maybe I'm not just the goddess of love. Maybe I'm the goddess of yearning. Of unfinished poems. Of the text you type and never send. You lie beside her. That's a lot of pressure. She laughs. Not really. Yearning doesn't want resolution. It just wants to exist. Before sleep, she pulls out a scroll. The History of Sexuality by Foucault. She reads a passage aloud about how societies control bodies by controlling desire. He understood me, she says. Better than most priests ever did. She rolls the scroll back up, places it beneath her head like a pillow, and whispers. You know what they never grasped? That I'm not about sex. I'm about permission. You ask, permission to what? She closes her eyes. To want without shame. To touch without fear. To exist in your skin like it's not a punishment. The candle gutters. The city groans in its sleep dot, and in the dark, she murmurs, tomorrow we visit a brothel. A good one. The kind where people remember how to say yes. Morning in Athens smells like compromise sweat, incense, sour wine, and something faintly sweet that might be roasted figs or just the memory of them. The sun is not gentle here. It arrives with full authority, spilling over rooftops and creeping between shutters, dragging the city awake whether it's ready or not. You find Aphrodite already outside, sitting on a low stone wall, her tunic hitched up to her knees and her hair twisted into a loose braid that looks accidental but isn't. She's eating a pomegranate, methodically, seed by seed, the juice bright against her fingers like fresh sign. They say this fruit belongs to Persephone, she muses, not looking at you. But it's always been mine. Sweetness with consequence. Desire that stains. She flicks a seed into the street. It lands at the feet of a passing soldier who doesn't notice. That, she says, is also a metaphor. Today's destination isn't marked on any temple map. You don't ask where you're going because by now you understand the rhythm. Aphrodite doesn't go to places, she summons them into meaning. This brothel, if it can even be called that, sits in the belly of the city, beneath layers of noise and reputation, tucked between a tanner's stall and a bakery that sells aphrodisiac pastries, with names like Hermes' Regret and Zeus's. Bad idea. The entrance is modest. A red curtain, frayed at the edges, and a handprint painted above the doorway, not artistic, just human. Inside, the air is thick with rose oil and unspoken stories. The floor is swept, the cushions clean, but nothing about the place is sterile. It's lived in. This is not a house of shame. It's a sanctuary of consent. The madam meets you at the door. She's tall, bare-shouldered, eyes lined in kohl that speaks fluent sarcasm. "We don't usually take walk-ins," she says, not unkindly. Aphrodite smiles. "I'm not here to work. I'm here to remember." The madam arches an eyebrow. "One of those days, is it?" Without waiting for an answer, she steps aside and lets you both in. Each room tells a different story. One glows with low lantern light and smells of jasmine. Another hums with laughter, not moans. You pass a room where two men sit fully clothed, just holding each other. In another, a woman gently braids her client's hair as he weeps. Aphrodite pauses at every doorway, not to stare, not to intrude, but to witness. "They think this is about bodies," she says quietly. "But it's about permission. To feel. To fall apart. To want something and not be punished for it." You ask if she's ever worked in a place like this. She smiles wry and slow. "Once, for a month, in Babylon. They paid me in poetry and dates." You ask why. "To understand. You can't be worshipped until you've knelt. You can't be desired until you've waited." The madam leads you to a private courtyard where a fountain gurgles softly and a fig tree offers shade like an old friend. "This," she says, "is where the stories live." Aphrodite sits on the ground without ceremony, back against the tree, and gestures for you to join her. The madam brings wine-spiced, dark, far too potent for this early in the day, and tells the first story. It's about a girl who came here after her betrothed died in battle. She didn't want to be touched, the madam says. Just to be reminded she was still made of skin. The second story comes from a man who paid just to lie beside someone who didn't speak. He said silence had been stolen from him by grief. He wanted to borrow it back. Aphrodite listens like she's harvesting the words, planting them somewhere behind her ribs. She tells a story of her own then. "There was a queen once who visited me in secret. Everyone thought she was chaste, pure, divine. But at night she came to me, trembling, begging to be undone." The madam laughs. "Queens always want to be undone." Aphrodite nods. "Because their crowns are heavy, and no one ever asks where it hurts." Then she does something that shocks you. She takes off her bracelet, the gold one etched with vines and small rubies, and places it on the stone beside the fountain. "For the house," she says. "For the next girl who thinks she's broken." The madam picks it up reverently. "She won't be broken for long," she says. "Not in here." As the sun climbs higher, the brothel begins to stir more loudly: footsteps, laughter, the occasional dramatic moan that might be sincere or just excellent performance art. You find yourself in a side room, listening as a young man recites a love poem he wrote for one of the workers. It's bad, beautifully bad. All metaphors about fire and oceans and probably a swan somewhere. Aphrodite listens without mocking. When he finishes, she claps once, slowly. "It's terrible," she says, "but it's honest. Keep writing." After lunch, a spread of olives, dates, warm bread, and a cheese so good it should be illegal, you and Aphrodite sit on the rooftop, watching the city vibrate beneath you. They've always tried to separate the sacred from the sensual. She says, "But that's a lie. The body is a cathedral. Every sigh is a hymn." She looks over at you. "And here they remember that." You ask her if she thinks the other gods understand what this place means. She laughs. Hera pretends not to. But she sends her handmaidens here for tea. Even Artemis slipped in once, said she was hunting. She left with smudged eyeliner. "And no arrows." You raise an eyebrow. She winks. Even gods need release, but most are too proud to admit it. As evening sets in, The brothel shifts again. Less performance, more truth. You watch as a middle-aged woman kisses another woman's. Hands for 10 minutes straight, no words. You watch as a blind man is led into a room where the scent of sandalwood curls like a lullaby. Aphrodite doesn't intrude. She honors. And in doing so, you begin to understand why her power has always made others nervous. It's not because she's about sex. It's because she's about freedom. And freedom, especially when it touches the body, terrifies those who rely on control. You sleep that night in one of the smaller rooms, clean sheets, soft mattress, no expectations, just quiet. Aphrodite sleeps on the floor again, arms folded behind her head, eyes open to the dark. They say gods don't dream, she whispers. But I do. I dream of being worshipped without being simplified, of being held without being feared. You ask, do the dreams ever come true? She turns her head toward you, the candlelight catching her face like a secret. Sometimes, usually in places like this. And then, with the softest voice you've ever heard her use, she says, tomorrow we visit a temple where I'm still. Feared more than loved. You don't expect frost. Not in the air, not in the tone, and definitely not in the place you're going next. But as you leave Athens and ascend into the highlands, the wind sharpens. It doesn't howl, it hisses. Like a warning. Like a rumor that's almost true. Aphrodite doesn't bundle up. She never does. Her breath fogs the air anyway, swirling in strange spirals that vanish just before you can decide if they spelled something. You try to ask where you're headed, but she just raises a single finger to her lips, and suddenly you're not cold anymore, you're cautious. Because today's visit isn't about devotion or memory. Today, she's walking straight into judgment. And she's smiling. You land on a plateau. Sparse, barren, the color of old bones and political silence. A temple rises in the center tall. Stern, perfect. Too perfect. Every column is symmetrical, every statue identical. The kind of place that screams order, virtue, restraint. The kind of place that worships the idea of purity without ever asking what it costs. You're in one of those temples. The ones built after the cults of passion. The temples that tolerated Aphrodite but never trusted her. You feel it before you step inside. This is where they loved her with disclaimers. Where they prayed for her favor, but not her presence. Aphrodite steps onto the marble like it owes her an apology that the priests, yes, all men, and yes, all shaved-headed and unbothered, emerge with expressions carved from passive-aggressive stone. Goddess, the eldest says, bowing the minimum amount legally required. We weren't expecting you. Aphrodite tilts her head. That's the thing about me. I show up when you've convinced yourself you've outgrown me. He offers her a seat. She doesn't take it. Instead, she walks the perimeter of the chamber, trailing her fingers across symbols etched into the wall. There's nothing erotic here. No lovers intertwined. No women lounging with wine. Just abstract forms. Loops, triangles, circles, pure geometry. She snorts. You've abstracted me, she says. You turned lust into logic, want into theory. She taps one symbol with her nail. This one's supposed to represent divine harmony. It looks like two tax forms having an awkward handshake. The priest clears his throat. We've evolved. My lady, we believe the passions you once inspired now belong to a more refined realm. She turns, slow as a tide before it drowns a coast. Refined, she repeats. As in filtered? Sanitized? You mean you've taken the heat out of worship and replaced it with intellectual acrobatics? You say divine. Connection, but you mean don't make us uncomfortable. She walks to the center where an altar stands empty. No flowers. No offerings, just a book. She picks it up, flips through a few pages, and laughs. You're quoting Plato. At my altar. She tosses it aside. No wonder nobody moans in your dreams. There's a flicker, then something behind her eyes. Not anger, playfulness, but the dangerous kind. The kind cats get right before they break something expensive. "Let's play a game," she says. "You say a word, and I'll show you what it actually feels like." The priest hesitates. "You mock our rituals." She smiles. "I resurrect them." He folds his hands. "Very well. Start with chastity." Aphrodite walks straight up to him and whispers something in his ear. His knees buckle slightly. You don't hear what she says. You're not supposed to. But whatever it is, it cuts through his robes and his reasoning. Like a hot needle through wax. "Next word," she says. He swallows hard. "Devotion." She closes her eyes, tilts her head back, and breathes so deeply it feels like the air itself leans in. Then she opens her mouth and sings one note, just one. And the sound of it fills the room like scent, like silk, like a secret remembered too late. One of the younger priests stumbles backward, hand over his chest. She steps onto the altar. Barefoot, the hem of her tunic brushing marble. You can't worship love by pretending it doesn't sweat. You can't venerate the sacred by sterilizing the body it comes in. She spins once, arms wide. You built this place on the idea that restraint is the highest virtue. But tell me, how many of you have actually felt holy while denying yourselves? No one answers, and then she tells a story, God. It's about a boy who came to this temple 100 years ago. Poor, beautiful, overflowing with questions and guilt. He prayed to me, she says, even though they told him not to. He asked if it was a sin to want another boy's touch. Her voice tightens. They told him it was, that it wasn't divine, that it didn't belong to me. They offered him silence, shame, and nothing else. She pauses. He took his own life behind this temple, tied his prayer ribbon to a fig tree, and waited to be reborn as someone holier. She looks at the priests now, really looks at them. And I've been haunting this place ever since. You don't breathe. Neither do they. She steps down from the altar, walks to the back of the temple, where a small garden grows, neglected, overgrown, ignored. She reaches into the underbrush and pulls out a faded cloth scrap. It's red, frayed, still knotted. His ribbon, she says. They never removed it, probably hoped it would rot away quietly. She ties it around her wrist. Now it's mine. And just like that, something shifts in the temple. A breeze rolls through, knocking over the book on the altar. The flames in the wall sconces flicker. One of the columns cracks, subtly, as if the architecture itself is trying to apologize. Aphrodite turns to you, voice barely a whisper. Fear is not reverence. Erasure is not evolution. You follow her out of the temple, your footsteps echoing against marble that feels suddenly less sure of itself. Outside, she stands beneath the sun, red ribbon fluttering in the wind. They think fearing me makes them strong, she says. But loving me bravely, that's where the power is. You ask if she'll come back here. She smiles. No, but I'll send someone, eventually. Someone loud, queer, complicated. They'll turn this place into something useful again. She takes your hand, presses it to the ribbon on her wrist. Do you feel it? She asks. That's what longing really feels like. Not shame, not silence, but wait, memory, fire. That night, you camp just beyond the temple grounds. No one dares to follow. Aphrodite lies under the stars with her hair fanned out like a war banner. She hums a song you've never heard. Or maybe it's not a song. Maybe it's a promise. Tomorrow, she says, we pay a visit to someone who thinks he invented war. You know exactly who she means, and you're not ready. You don't speak during the chariot ride. Neither does she. There's something about the silence that feels ceremonial, like the air itself is holding its breath in anticipation. Aphrodite's eyes are fixed on the horizon, where the sea churns with a restlessness that mirrors something old and sleepless inside her. She's wearing red today, not pink, not blush, not rose. but red like a cut that doesn't clot. You know where you're going before she says it. You felt it in every mile, in the way her fingers tap against the chariot's edge, like she's rehearsing something that's been waiting centuries to be said. You're heading toward Thrace, Ares territory, the last stronghold of brute desire in bronze casing. The place where love once dressed itself as violence and called it passion. Aphrodite doesn't flinch, not yet, but you can see it the way. Her jaw tightens ever so slightly. This isn't a return. It's a reckoning. You land just before dusk. The sky is all drama reds, oranges, purples, like the gods themselves couldn't decide on a mood. Ares' temple sits on a cliff, jagged and arrogant, overlooking a battlefield that hasn't been used in centuries, but still smells like sweat and fear. The temple is less of a sanctuary and more of a trophy room. Shields line the walls. Spears cross above the entrance. Blood has been scrubbed from the floor so many times it's practically part of the marble now. Aphrodite walks in like she owns the place, which technically she once did, maybe still does. You trail behind her, half shadow, half audience. Waiting for the performance to begin, Ares isn't inside. Of course not, he wouldn't make this easy. But the statues are. Tall, muscular, heroic versions of him in every conceivable power pose. And always alone. That's the first thing you notice. In every depiction, he's solitary. No comrades, no lovers, no context. Just we're personified. Aphrodite runs a hand along one of the stone thighs. He always preferred the statues to the stories, she says. Statues don't talk back. She walks through the temple, pausing occasionally, like she's navigating a haunted house filled with ex-boyfriends. He used to meet me here, she says, after battle. Still bleeding, still breathing heavy. He'd throw his sword down like foreplay and say something ridiculous like, "I conquered this for you." She laughs. And I'd pretend I was impressed. You ask her why she came back. She doesn't answer at first. Just keeps walking until she reaches the main altar. It's black marble, unadorned, except for a single iron chain looped casually across its edge. A token, a joke, a memory. He once tied me to this, she says, not for punishment, not for pleasure, just to prove he could. She touches the chain, then drops it. I didn't scream. That irritated him. And then he appears, not from smoke, not from flame, just walks in, quietly, as if he knows this moment isn't his. Ares looks exactly like you remember, broad, scarred, handsome in a way that feels hostile. His armor is half on, like he either just came from a battle or is always ready for one. He doesn't speak. Neither does she. For a full minute, they just stare at each other across the temple like gods trapped in a shared dream. Finally, Aphrodite breaks the silence. You kept my chain. Ares shrugs. Didn't know what else to do with it. She steps closer. You could have let me go, Ares smirks. I thought you liked being chased. She tilts her head. I liked being wanted. You never knew the difference. He looks away for the first time, jaw twitching. You left. You stopped. Seeing me, you slept with half the pantheon. You gave up first. Each line is a spark, but no fire starts. Not yet. Aphrodite walks up to him until they're nearly touching. You love the idea of me, she says. The conquest, the prize. But the moment I bled anything real, you retreated like a coward. Ares stiffens. You think I'm afraid of you? She nods. Terrified. Because you don't know how to fight someone who doesn't want to win. They stand there, inches apart, a war held together by memory. Then she steps back. Just once. Just enough. I didn't come to argue, she says. I came to return something. She pulls a small pouch from her sleeve. Inside is a coin bronze, old, worn to a near-perfect smoothness. You gave this to me after our first fight. Said it was the only thing you valued more than your armor. I thought you meant it. She places it on the altar. I'm giving it back because I don't need your metaphors anymore. I have my own. Ares says nothing. He doesn't pick it up, doesn't move. And somehow, that says more than anything else. Aphrodite turns, not triumphant, not wounded, just done. Goodbye, Ares, she says, voice soft as a curtain closing. I hope one day you learn to feel something that doesn't bleed. You exit the temple with her, the wind picking up like applause withheld out of respect. She doesn't speak again until you're halfway back to the chariot. Then, he wanted me frozen. Beautiful, silent, decorative. And when I cracked, he panicked. That's not love. That's possession dressed in passion's clothes. You ask if she still loves him. She doesn't answer for a long time. Then, finally, I love the version of him that once whispered my name like a prayer. But that version died in the war. He never stopped fighting. That night, you don't camp. You float. The chariot drifts over a sleeping sea, the stars unusually bright, like they're leaning in to eavesdrop. Aphrodite sits cross-legged, her red robe fluttering like a flame caught in memory. She opens a scroll. Sex with Kings flips to a chapter about royal mistresses who held more power from their beds than most men did from thrones. We were blamed for everything, she says. Wars, poisonings, bankrupt empires. But we were the ones who listened, who held kings when they wept, who knew where the pressure points were. We were dangerous because we were needed. She looks over at you. That's why they feared me. Because I reminded them that real love isn't obedient. It's disruptive. It exposes. She closes the scroll and lies back, hands folded over her stomach. Tomorrow we go to a garden, a mortal one, built by women who wanted to feel holy without priests. You ask what it's called. She smiles. They called it desire. The garden isn't marked on any map. It never was. That was the point. It existed in whispers, passed from woman to woman, lover to lover, woven into the fringe of veils and the lilt of songs sung too softly to be overheard by men. You arrive at dawn, where the sky is still deciding what color to wear, and the air tastes like damp stone and something faintly floral, lavender, maybe, or jasmine, the kind that only blooms when no one's looking. Aphrodite doesn't rush. She walks barefoot over dew-wet grass, the hem of her gown dragging like fog, and for the first time in weeks, she looks almost at peace. Lesbos was a poem, she murmurs. But this was a prayer. The garden is modest. No fountains, no statues, no gold. Just a winding path carved by footsteps too soft to leave claims. The walls are high, ivy-cloaked, protective. Here, history forgot to knock. Aphrodite passes through a wooden gate that creaks in a way that feels intentional, as though even the hinges remember who she is. Inside, there are beds of herbs and flowers and benches curved like the inside of an embrace. A pergola draped in vines leans lazily over a mosaic that has nearly faded into the earth. Only fragments remain. A hand reaching, a cheek turned, a mouth half-parted. You wouldn't know what it once was unless you'd loved someone hard enough to recognize the shape of want. She kneels in front of it, fingertips hovering over the tile like she's afraid touching it will wake something. They built this, she says, because they needed a place where no one asked them to explain. You ask who they were. She smiles, still looking at the broken image. Wives, widows, daughters of merchants, lovers of poets. They came here when they couldn't breathe anywhere else. When the temples told them love was obedience, and the streets told them desire was dangerous. She finally touches the tile. They wanted to feel holy and human at the same time. A bird chirps overhead, sharp, bright, defiantly alive. Aphrodite glances up. There was one, once, who carved a poem into the bark of that olive tree. Said my name not as a prayer, but as a promise. You walk with her through the garden, and she shows you the remnants. A vine tied with faded ribbons, each one a vow kept in silence. A stone basin that once held rosewater, now dry and cracked. A bench where two initials are etched so close together they've begun to blur. Historians still argue whether these gardens existed, she says. They find no records, no monuments, no dedications, she pauses. That's because it was never for them. She turns toward you. It was for the ones who touched each other like secrets and carried shame in their teeth. You sit beneath a fig tree with twisted roots and branches heavy with fruit. Aphrodite plucks one, splits it with her fingers, and hands you half. It's sweet, of course. Sticky. The kind of flavor that clings to your tongue like a story you're not sure you should tell. She used to feed these to me, she says. The one with the laugh that sounded like it could undo cities. You don't ask who. Not yet. She tells you anyway. Her name was Dione, a priestess who served me but refused to worship me. Sighed I didn't need more worship. I needed honesty. She leans back against the tree. She never called me goddess. Only love. And when we were alone, sometimes not even that. Just you. They met, she explains, when Dione was tasked with cleaning the altars. She scrubbed the marble with salt and vinegar and too much resentment. She hated the rituals, Aphrodite says. Said they made love feel like a performance. Sighed I was more than roses and perfume. You ask what happened. Aphrodite closes her eyes. We met here, in this garden. For months. She taught me how to be still, how to listen, how to be held without expectation. A pause, and then the temple found out. Sighed I had seduced her. Sighed she'd broken her vows. Another fig falls beside her. She doesn't flinch. They exiled her, said she was impure, that she'd been corrupted by desire. But she just smiled and said, then I finally understood what worship means. Aphrodite pulls from her satchel a small folded cloth. Inside it is a pressed flower, long faded to the color of dusk. She left this for me in the garden. Wall. You watch as she tucks it behind a loose brick, like returning it is the only way to complete the story. They erased her name from the records, but not from me. You spend the rest of the afternoon tending the garden, not because it needs it, but because it feels right. Aphrodite weeds, gently, hands deep in the dirt, like she's trying to remember what it means to create something that doesn't ask. To be seen, you water the herbs, wring out the old ribbons, sweep the paths, and all the while, the air grows heavier, not with heat, but with presence. You feel them, the women, the echoes. Every time the wind brushes your neck, it feels like a hand, like a memory, like someone once sat where you're sitting now and whispered something they couldn't say anywhere else. As the sun begins to lower, Aphrodite lights a small oil lamp near the broken mosaic. They used to leave these burning all night, she says. Not to summon me, just to remind each other they weren't alone. She doesn't speak after that, just sits beside the flame, watching it flicker, as if waiting for it to answer. You want to ask her if she misses Dione, if gods even can miss. But then she says, missing is what makes us godlike. It means we remember. It means we want. That night, you don't sleep in the chariot. You sleep in the garden, under the fig tree, the stars sharp above you and the earth warm beneath. Aphrodite lies nearby, hair spread out like petals after a storm, the scent of myrrh and earth clinging to her skin. She reads aloud from a scroll this time, not philosophy or history, poetry. Sappho again. But softer, slower. She doesn't perform it. She relives it. And when she stops, she whispers, tomorrow we visit the city that tried to erase me. You ask which city. She smiles, eyes already closed. Rome. The city rises like an apology in stone. Massive, confident, too polished to be innocent. Rome doesn't whisper like Athens or sing like Lesbos. It declares. Every column screams of conquest. Every arch bends under the weight of its own arrogance. You arrive just after a storm. Puddles still cling to the cobblestones like ghosts, and the air smells like iron and wet ambition. Aphrodite steps out of the chariot and into the city with the casual grace of someone who's been here before and never truly forgave it. She's dressed in gold today, not soft, not subtle, blinding, reflective, sharp at the edges. If Athens turned her into a theory, Rome turned her into a trophy. And she's come to collect. You pass through the forum like shadows through history, unnoticed but not unseen. Statues of Venus line the way, each more pristine and impersonal than the last. You recognize her face in the marble, but it's not her, not really. It's a version of her. Lips parted in calculated allure, breasts perfect and symmetrical, hips tilted just enough to be suggestive, but never confrontational. Aphrodite walks past them without a glance. They renamed me, she says, voice flat, tamed me, wrapped me in Latin and politics, called me Venus and told me to smile. She stops in front of a particularly massive statue, her, naked, holding an apple and a dove, gaze soft demure. They turned me into a mascot for empire, she murmurs. Love is propaganda, beauty is compliance. You ask if she hated it. She doesn't answer, just steps forward and touches the base of the statue, where a crack is forming near her. Ankle, she's crumbling, she says. Fitting. She was never real to begin with. You walk with her to the old temple of Venus Genetrix, built by Julius Caesar himself. He claimed I was his ancestor, she mutters, running her fingers along the ruined columns. Said the first gave him legitimacy. That I stood behind his conquest, she pauses. He never asked if I wanted to. Inside, the temple is a ruin broken. Walls, shattered altars, silence where once there was spectacle. She walks slowly, deliberately, each footstep echoing like a dare. They prayed to me for victory, she says, for fertility, for beauty that conquered. But they stripped the chaos out of me, the ache, the choice. They made me polite, marketable. She picks up a piece of fallen marble, a fragment of a face. They carved me with smiles but never gave me a voice. And then she tells you about Livia, empress, wife of Augustus, patroness of the ideal Roman modest, obedient, untouched by chaos. Livia hated me, Aphrodite says, eyes gleaming. Not because I threatened her power, but because I reminded her of what she had to bury to keep it. According to the myths, Livia dedicated a temple to Concordia, not to Venus. She championed chastity, discipline, the virtues that kept Rome tidy. But in private, Aphrodite adds, she wore silk soaked in sandalwood and wrote letters to a woman named Calpurnia that smelled like heartbreak. She walks to what remains of the inner sanctum. They all wanted me erased, but they couldn't forget me. So they dressed me up and called it reverence. You sit beside her on the edge of a shattered altar. Do you miss being worshipped? You ask. She thinks for a long moment. No, she says. I miss being understood. She pulls from her satchel a wax tablet, old and worn. Found this in a villa north of here, she says. On it, etched in tiny deliberate script, is a poem. It reads, *Venus, I lit no candles. But I thought of her when I was dying. I hope that counts. She tucks it into the wall. It counts. As night falls, the city doesn't sleep it. Struts. Rome after dark is a different beast entirely. The wine flows, the villas thrum with laughter, and every shadow feels like an invitation. Aphrodite walks through it all like a storm dressed for a masquerade. You find yourselves at a private gathering, tucked behind a senator's estate. It's not a temple, not a brothel, somewhere in between. Music plays softly. Bodies move closer than politics allows, and she becomes the room, not the center of it, not the loudest, but the pulse. People gravitate toward her without knowing why. A woman asks her for a blessing. A young man confesses his affair. Someone places a wreath at her feet. No one calls. Her Venus, no one dares. She dances once, slowly, with a stranger whose name she never learns. You watch the way her fingers brush a shoulder, the way her eyes close not out of seduction, but recognition. This is what they tried to erase: the feeling, the chaos, the risk. Back at the villa much later, she reads aloud from a scroll the erotic spirit through history. She flips to the Roman section and snorts. They loved control, even in their desire. She reads a passage about how Roman lovers used coded gestures and mirrors to mask what they couldn't say. Desire as performance, as strategy. She lowers the scroll. But not truth, never truth. You ask her if she thinks Rome ever truly loved her. She pauses. Rome loved what I could do for them, not who I was. They worshipped the results, not the root. She stands, walks to the balcony, and looks out over the city that once tried to own her. But I left pieces of myself here anyway, in whispered names, in secret gardens, in letters burned in fear. She turns to you. Love doesn't vanish. It just changes its costume. That night, she carves her name into a stone near the temple ruins. Not big, not for glory. Just enough to remind the future that she was here. That she remembers. And then she whispers, "Tomorrow we go to Pompeii." You raise an eyebrow. To the ruins? She smiles, sharp and sad. No, to the moment before. Pompeii sleeps beneath a shroud of silence, but not the kind that promises peace. The silence you find here is heavy, like a breath held too long. Before the scream, you arrive on the cusp of catastrophe, hours before the world ends in fire and ash. The streets are alive, vibrant, careless, full of the scent of fresh bread and jasmine oil and desperate laughter. Aphrodite steps into the city with eyes wide open, soaking in every detail like a woman who knows this moment will be erased, but refuses to forget. She moves past bustling markets and crowded baths, past senators arguing over wine and slaves whispering secrets in the shadows. The city pulses like a heartbeat, young and reckless, utterly unaware of the doom lurking. Beneath its cobblestones, you trail her through the labyrinth of alleys, the sunlight catching the dust in golden ribbons. Pompeii, she murmurs, was a city of desire. Not just of pleasure, but of living without apology. Of grasping at joy, even when the ground trembled. She stops at a fountain where children splash, their laughter sharp and bright. They worshipped me here, she says softly. Not as a goddess, but as a promise that even in the shadow of death, love could bloom. You watch as she approaches a villa, grand but still full of warmth, where frescoes depict scenes of revelry and intimacy. The walls are painted with flowers and gods and lovers entwined in ways both tender and wild. She runs her fingers over a mosaic floor, tracing the patterns with reverence. This was her favorite room, she says, eyes misting. The one where she danced with him, the senator, the poet, the man who stole her breath and her nights. You ask who she was. Aphrodite smiles, the kind of smile that carries centuries of secrets. The mistress of that house, the woman who lived fully, loved fiercely, and never asked for forgiveness. As dusk falls, the air thickens with the scent of wine and cedarwood. The city's revelry grows louder, the music wilder. Aphrodite moves through the crowds, her presence a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the temperature dropping just before a storm. She pauses by a fountain and plucks a single white lily, its petals soft and fragile. This flower, she says, was sacred to me here. It represented purity, yes, but also transience. Beauty that fades, desire that burns bright and quick. You ask if she fears the city's destruction. She laughs, a sound both tender and fierce. I don't fear endings, she says. I fear being forgotten. Her eyes scan the horizon where Mount Vesuvius looms, silent but ominous. Pompeii's death was sudden, brutal, but it preserved moments of love, laughter, life. I want to hold on to those moments. Later, you find yourselves in a private chamber within the villa, dimly lit by oil lamps flickering against frescoed walls. Aphrodite uncovers a scroll, ancient and delicate. She reads aloud from Sex with Kings, describing a ritual practiced by Roman courtesans in Pompeii, an invocation of love's power to transcend mortality. The words paint pictures of secret ceremonies, whispered vows, and the sacred mingling of flesh and spirit. They believed, she says, that through love, they could cheat death. That desire was a rebellion against the inevitable. You watch her face as she reads and realize this is more than history to her. It's a memory stitched into her soul. Desire, she whispers, is the only immortality we have. The night deepens and the city's laughter fades to a murmur. Aphrodite stands at a balcony overlooking the sleeping streets. She pulls from her satchel a small vial filled with oil, scented with myrrh and frankincense. With a steady hand, she sprinkles it onto the ground below. For the lovers who never got to say goodbye, she says. For the stories that ended too soon. You feel the weight of her grief and hope mingled in that simple act. You ask what comes next. She turns to you, eyes shining with fierce light. We visit the ashes, the ruins, to see what remains when desire outlasts death. And you know the journey isn't over. Not yet. The ruins of Pompeii greet you like an old scar, faded, cracked, but still raw beneath the surface. The air is dry and heavy, carrying whispers of lives frozen mid-motion. Aphrodite walks among the collapsed walls and shattered frescoes with a reverence that's almost sacred. You notice how her steps slow, as if the ground beneath her feet is a fragile memory she doesn't want to shatter. The silence here is different from any other place, deeper, filled with the echo of vanished voices, the trace of laughter caught in stone. She leads you to the amphitheater where gladiators once fought for glory and survival. The seats are crumbling, but the energy is palpable, ghosts of cheers still hanging in the air like incense. Aphrodite places her palm against the cracked stone floor. This, she says, was a stage not just for violence, but for desire masquerading as valor. Men risking death not only for honor, but for the gaze of someone watching, longing. You imagine the crowd, the tension, the heat of bodies pressed together in anticipation. Desire, she adds, wears many masks. Next she takes you to a villa's remains where the famous fresco of the Dionysian Mysteries is half-preserved wild revelry frozen in pigment. She runs her fingers along the wall, tracing the faded outlines of vines and dancers. They celebrated chaos here, she whispers, a chaos I've long been associated with, but rarely understood fully. They knew the power of surrender, the danger in letting go. You realize that here, in these ruins, the raw edges of love and pleasure are still visible beneath centuries of ash. Aphrodite tells you about the secret. Rooms, hidden chambers where lovers met behind closed doors, away from the eyes of a society that judged too harshly. They carved promises into the walls, she says. Names entwined with hearts, prayers for protection, curses against betrayal. She kneels before one such inscription, her fingers lightly brushing the ancient graffiti. Love was a rebellion here, a theft, a sacred act of defiance. You ask if the gods mourn what was lost. She smiles, bittersweet. We mourn what was never truly ours. Desire belongs to mortals as much as to immortals. When cities burn, it's not just stone that falls, it's stories, dreams, and the fleeting touch of hands. She stands, eyes fixed on the horizon where Mount Vesuvius's shadow still looms like a reminder at dusk. You reach the Forum Baths, now a hollow skeleton of marble and water channels. Aphrodite steps into the cold pool basin, water long since drained, and lets her hands trail along the smooth stones. This was a place of cleansing, she says, but also of connection, where bodies met without shame and secrets slipped between steam and whispers. She closes her eyes, imagining the voices, the laughter, the touch. Even in death, These places hold the echoes of intimacy. As night falls, you find shelter in a modest inn. The room is sparse, but the window opens to the stars, unchanging witnesses to centuries of love and loss. Aphrodite sits by the window, a quiet fierceness in her gaze. She opens the erotic spirit through history once more, flipping to passages that speak of mortality and passion entwined. They believed desire was the closest thing to immortality, she muses. That in loving fiercely we defy the silence of death. You wonder aloud if she ever fears being forgotten. She looks at you, her eyes glistening. I fear the world. Forgetting how to want. Forgetting that desire is not weakness but power. That love in all its forms is rebellion. Before sleep claims you, she traces a finger along the windowsill, as if drawing invisible symbols. Tomorrow, she says, we sail to the islands where desire whispers in a different language. You realize the journey is far from over. The stories still ripple beneath the surface, waiting to be heard. Athens at night is a different beast entirely. A city shedding its skin like a serpent, revealing raw nerves and hidden scars beneath the marble facades. The moon hangs low and heavy, casting long shadows that flicker like whispered secrets. You arrive in silence, the streets nearly deserted except for the occasional flicker of torchlight or the distant murmur of a clandestine gathering. Aphrodite moves through the city like a ghost returned, not the bright goddess of festivals and flutes, but something darker, older, and infinitely more dangerous. Her eyes catch every glint of silver, every crack in the stone, every heartbeat that dares to echo too loud in the night. You want to ask her what she's looking for, but the answer is clear in the tense set of her jaw and the way her fingers twitch like she's reaching for something just out of sight, something that might unravel everything. She stops suddenly before a narrow alleyway, its walls smothered in ivy and the scent of damp earth. This, she breathes, is where the real stories hide, the ones that never made it into the poems. You follow her inside, and the air closes in thick with shadow and the electric buzz of danger. A group huddles in the gloom, faces half lit by a single lantern. They look up as you enter, thieves, lovers, exiles, poets who speak in riddles and promises. Aphrodite's smile is a slash of moonlight. Welcome home, she says out. The night unfolds like a fever dream. There's wine that tastes of blood and honey, laughter that shakes loose old ghosts, and stories told in stolen glances and trembling hands. Aphrodite listens more than she speaks, but when she does, her words cut through the haze like a knife. Desire, she says, is not a quiet thing, it's a rebellion. A shout in the dark. It's the reason we're still here, still fighting, still burning. You watch as she moves among the crowd, her presence igniting sparks in eyes long dulled by fear and forgetting. A woman steps forward, offering a tattered book. Aphrodite flips through it, her fingers tracing the words with reverence and rage. It's a collection of forbidden poems, verses that dared to name love in all its messy, beautiful forms. These words, Aphrodite says, are fire, and fire can't be tamed. Suddenly, the door bursts open. Figures clad in armor flood the room, shouting accusations and demands. The crowd scatters, but Aphrodite stands her ground. Her eyes flash like lightning. You can burn temples and silence tongues, she says, voice low and fierce. But you cannot burn desire. It lives in the ashes. The soldiers hesitate, caught between fear and something unspoken. And in that moment, you see a flicker of something ancient in Aphrodite's gaze, something that transcends beauty and power. It's defiance, survival, the raw, unyielding will to be. As the chaos subsides, she turns to you, breathless but unbroken. This is why I return, she says, to remind them, to remind us. Her hand finds yours, steady and sure. Desire is a storm, and storms will always reshape the world. You leave the alley with your heart pounding, the city alive again with possibility and danger. Aphrodite's laughter trails behind you, a sound both wild and haunting. You realize this journey isn't just about the past or the gods. It's about the fire still burning inside all of us, the unquenchable hunger to feel, to connect, to want, and you know there's no turning back. The next morning feels like waking up inside a dream you can't quite shake, light filtered through cracked shutters, distant church bells mingling with the clatter of market stalls, and the smell of fresh bread folding into the scent of damp stone. You and Aphrodite walk slowly through the waking city, the weight of the previous night's defiance still humming in your bones. She's quieter now, the wild spark dimmed into something deeper, more contemplative. You sense that the real work is just beginning, not the spectacle of rebellion, but the quiet reshaping of what it means to love and be loved. She stops at a small, nondescript courtyard where a fountain burbles softly. The air here smells of basil and old promises. This, she says, is where I come when the world gets too loud, when the gods forget what it's like to be vulnerable. You watch her sit on the fountain's edge, toes dipping into the cool water. Vulnerability, she muses, is the true rebellion. To open yourself to pain and joy without armor. She turns to you, eyes shining with a fierce softness. And that's what I want to teach again, to feel everything without shame. You follow her through the city's quieter streets, passing homes where windows glow softly with candlelight, where lovers whisper behind curtains, where children chase dreams too big for the daylight. Aphrodite points out places that once mattered. The corner where two women were caught holding hands, the garden where a poet wrote verses that scandalized emperors, the tavern where a slave and a senator shared a secret. Every act of love, she says, is a stitch in the fabric of resistance. Later, you find yourselves in a small, crowded room, filled with voices rising in song and laughter. It's a gathering of artists, rebels, those who live on the fringes and weave their defiance into art and desire. Aphrodite moves among them, a silent muse inspiring courage and truth. A young woman takes her hand, eyes bright with gratitude. And fire, you remind us, she says, that love is not a chain but a key. Aphrodite smiles, the kind of smile that carries the weight of centuries and the lightness of new beginnings. That night, under a sky crowded with stars, Aphrodite speaks softly about the cost of love, the sacrifices, the betrayals, the moments of unbearable longing, but also, she says, about its power. To heal, to transform, to create. She tells you about the women who built secret gardens, the poets who risked everything to write forbidden verses, the lovers who chose each other despite the world's demands. Their stories are mine, she says, and I carry them forward. As dawn approaches, she turns to you with a gentle urgency. Tomorrow we end where we began. Not on Olympus, but here with the people. Because love is not a god's gift. It's a human right. You nod, feeling the weight and wonder of what lies ahead. The journey has been long, winding, painful, beautiful. But as you stand beside Aphrodite, ready to face whatever comes next, you know one thing for certain. Desire will never be tamed. It will always burn. Fierce, relentless, and free. The city wakes slowly, the first light threading through narrow streets like fingers searching for forgotten promises. You and Aphrodite stand together at the edge of the marketplace, watching life bloom in all its chaotic splendor. Here, there are no gods, no statues, no endless dramas played out on marble stages. Just people flawed, messy, hungry for connection. She breathes in deeply, the scent of bread and sweat and wildflowers filling her lungs. This, she says softly, is where desire lives now. Not in temples or myths, but in the heartbeat of the everyday. You walk beside her through the crowd, feeling the pulse of the city, a rhythm that's uneven, unpredictable, and beautifully alive. She points out lovers stealing moments between merchants, children chasing shadows, friends laughing with abandon. Desire isn't just sex, she murmurs. It's the courage to reach out, to say yes, to risk everything for a touch, a glance, a word. You see it in her eyes, the fierce compassion of someone who's seen too many hearts broken, but refuses to stop believing in love's power. As the day unfolds, Aphrodite gathers stories from the people you meet, tales of love that defied convention, of yearning that overcame fear, of joy found in unlikely places. She listens without judgment, her presence a balm to wounds both old and new. A mother tells of the daughter she loves fiercely despite a world that doesn't understand. A young man speaks of the courage it took to embrace who he truly is. Each story weaves into a tapestry of resilience and hope. In the evening, you find a quiet rooftop overlooking the city's twinkling lights. Aphrodite sits beside you, her fingers tracing patterns in the dust. I've carried so many versions of myself, she says. The goddess of beauty, the symbol of lust, the patron of rebels. But none of that matters if I forget why I exist. She looks out at the horizon, where the sky melts into a sea of stars. I exist because desire is eternal. Because it's the spark that keeps the world turning. The fire that refuses to be extinguished. You ask if she's at peace. She smiles, a slow, knowing smile. I'm learning to be. But peace isn't stillness. It's acceptance. Of pain and joy, loss and love. She leans her head on your shoulder. Thank you for walking this path with me. The night deepens, wrapping the city in a velvet embrace. The sounds of laughter and life drift upward, mingling with the whisper of the breeze. You realize this journey wasn't just about a goddess reclaiming her power. It was about reclaiming the messy, beautiful humanity in all of us. As you close your eyes, the final thought lingers. Desire is not just a feeling, it's a revolution, a soft, relentless uprising that will never fade. End of script. Sweet dreams.